You've been lying in the same 3 feet of grass for 11 hours. Your left arm went numb around hour 6, and you stopped noticing an hour after that. There's an insect crawling across your eyelid right now, and you are not going to blink it away because 40 yards out, a man with a rifle is scanning the tree line for exactly the kind of movement your eyelid would make. Somewhere behind your ribs, your heart is still doing its job at a perfectly normal pace, which is its own small miracle, because nothing else about this position is normal at all. That's hour 11. The mission is 72. So here's the actual question. Holding still for 3 days sounds like the hard part, and it isn't. The hard part is everything your body keeps doing anyway, whether you give it permission or not. It still needs food, it still needs water, and at some point, with zero warning and zero patience for your operations order, it still needs to empty itself out. All while you can't stand up, can't shift your weight more than an inch, and can't make a sound doing any of it. We're going to get to the worst item on that list. Forget the bugs, forget the boredom. This is a problem most civilians never think about until someone actually asks them to solve it. And once you hear how a team handles it, you'll understand why instructors treat it less like an inconvenience and more like a tactical skill. Because inside a hide, that's exactly what it is. Start at the beginning before anyone's lying still for anything. Before a shooter and a spotter can hold a position for 3 days, they have to get into that position without a single soul seeing them arrive. And that usually means crawling the final stretch on their stomachs for hours, sometimes overnight, wearing a suit built out of burlap, netting, and whatever's actually growing in that patch of dirt. The suit isn't store-bought camouflage. Teams build their own, thread by thread, matching it to the exact field they'll be lying in, because dead grass from last week reads as fake against grass that's alive today. And a good pair of eyes on the other end of a scope will catch that difference in a second. Marine Corps sniper Carlos Hathcock called the crawling technique worming. In 1966, on a volunteer mission behind enemy lines in Vietnam, he used it to cover roughly 1,500 yards over 4 days and 3 nights without sleep, closing on a North Vietnamese army general. Enemy patrols walked close enough that he could hear them talking to each other. At one point, a snake crossed within reach of his hand, and he stayed exactly where he was, because in that field, moving was the only way to die. That's the baseline every modern sniper school still trains against. The suit's better now, the gear's lighter, but the discipline underneath it hasn't changed at all. Discipline like that starts before the crawl even begins. Scent carries as far as sound does, sometimes farther. So there's no soap, no cologne, no scented anything in the days leading up to a mission, because a dog, or even a sharp-nosed human, can pick up what a scope can't see. Wind gets read constantly too, not just for shooting, but because it decides which direction your own smell is traveling and how far. A shooter who nails every other part of concealment and forgets which way the breeze is blowing has effectively been announcing himself the entire time. Even the color of a hand shows up under the wrong light, which is why gloves and face paint aren't optional gear. They're the last few inches of the disguise that everything else depends on. Once a team is finally in position, the eating starts, and it looks nothing like eating. No wrappers crinkling, no chewing with your mouth open. Rations get pre-opened in the dark before first light, by feel, so there's zero rustling once the sun comes up and sound starts carrying across open ground. Food goes in on the exhale, timed to disappear inside a shooter's own breathing pattern, because even the rhythm of chewing can catch a trained eye that's been trained specifically to notice anything that doesn't match wind moving through grass. Every meal is cold, and there's no coffee, which for a team running on almost no sleep might be the single cruelest part of the whole job. Just cold calories, eaten as quietly as a human being can physically manage, meal after meal for 3 straight days. There's no getting up to stretch your legs after that. There's no getting up at all. Water gets rationed the exact same careful way, sip by sip, and not because anyone's worried about running out. Too much water on board creates a different, more immediate problem, and we'll get back to that. For now, understand that a 2-person team splits the job of simply staying alert. One watches while the other allows himself something close to sleep, though sleep is generous. It's more a kind of half-consciousness, where a boot scrape 100 yards off will snap him upright before his partner even has to reach over. Nobody actually rests out there. They take shifts not quite resting, hour after hour for the better part of 3 days. That's the part a team can plan for on paper. The part they can't fully plan for is what the ground itself does to a human body left in one position for that long. By hour 20, joints start locking up in ways that have nothing to do with willpower. Hips ache under the weight of a pack that can run past 60 pounds, worn for hours before the crawl-in even began. Muscles cramp and there's no getting up to walk it off, so a shooter learns to flex tiny, isolated muscle groups without shifting his silhouette by so much as an inch, fighting his own body's demand to move while looking from 40 yards away exactly like part of the landscape. Insects don't care about any of this. They land, they bite, and they linger. And the same discipline that kept Hathcock motionless while a snake crossed his hand is the discipline keeping a modern sniper from twitching when something with 6 legs decides his neck looks like home. Here's the part that catches people off guard. It isn't fear that breaks a shooter down over 3 days, it's the itching. Fear you can channel. An ant walking across your ear for 40 minutes has no tactical use at all. Cold works on you slower, but meaner. Night temperatures drop hard, and a body that isn't moving generates almost no heat to push back against it. By the second night, the shivering isn't the violent kind people picture. It's small and constant, which is somehow worse, because it means your body has already started quietly rationing warmth on its own, without asking you first. Your fingers stiffen first, then your toes, and a shooter has to work them just enough to keep blood moving without ever letting the motion travel up into a shoulder or an arm where it might actually be seen. There's no getting up to warm your hands. There's no getting up, period. That sentence is going to come back a few more times before we're done, because it's the one honest fact holding this entire mission together. Heat does the opposite job, and it shows up on the other end of the calendar. In summer terrain, a ghillie suit built to hide a body from a rifle scope also traps every degree of body heat against the skin, and a shooter lying in direct sun for hours can lose fluid faster than his rationed water can replace it. Instructors have a blunt way of putting it. The suit that keeps you alive by hiding, you can also be the thing that starts to kill you slowly, if nobody's watching the clock, on how long you've been baking inside it. So water discipline isn't only about lasting 72 hours, it's about drinking just enough at just the right pace to keep a body functioning without triggering the exact problem we're about to cover sooner than anyone wants to deal with it. Staying alert through all of this is its own separate fight. A shooter can't drink coffee, can't move around, can't do any of the normal things a tired person does to snap themselves awake. What's left is smaller and stranger. Controlled breathing, deliberately shifting focus between the near field and the far field every few minutes to keep the eyes from glazing over. Counting sometimes, just to give a fatigued brain something to hold on to, besides the urge to close its eyes for what feels like one harmless second. Fall asleep on watch, and you haven't just failed a test. You're the reason your partner doesn't come home, and every shooter who's been through a real selection course carries that fact with him the entire time he's lying there. Communication has to survive that same silence. No radio chatter that carries, hand signals, and when even that's too much movement, a light touch passed between two bodies lying close enough to feel it. An entire warning sometimes delivered through a single tap on a boot. By hour 30, thirst, hunger, cold and cramping are all stacked on top of a nervous system that hasn't had real rest in longer than most people go without checking their phone. Modern hides add a layer teams a generation ago never had to think about either. Thermal cameras and drones now hunt for heat signatures the same way an enemy patrol once hunted for movement. So staying still isn't only about not being seen anymore. It's about not being felt by a sensor from half a mile up. A team's discipline now has to fool two different kinds of eyes at once, and neither one forgives a mistake. Time itself starts doing something strange around this point. With no sunrise to watch, no clock to check, and nothing to do but scan the same 40 yards of ground over and over, hours stop feeling like hours. Some shooters describe losing track of whether it's day 3 or day 2 entirely. Their whole sense of time narrowed down to the small repeating motion of breathing in, breathing out, watching, waiting. The mind, with nothing new to chew on, starts finding threats that aren't there. And part of a spotter's job is talking his partner back down from every shadow that starts looking like movement after 50 straight hours of nothing. And that whole stack, the ache, the cold, the itching, the fight to stay awake, is exactly the setup for the part almost nobody talks about, because it's the one detail that actually stops most people cold the first time they hear it explained in full. At some point, usually sooner than anyone plans for and never on a convenient schedule, a shooter has to relieve himself completely, without standing, without moving more than a few inches, and without breaking the position that's kept him invisible for 2 straight days. Teams plan for this the same methodical way they plan ammunition and water, because leaving it to chance in a hide isn't an option. Waste goes into sealed bags, packed out with everything else the team brought in, because nothing gets left behind that could mark a position or prove anyone was ever lying in that spot. It happens on your back or your side, inside a suit built to erase a human silhouette from 100 yards away, with a partner close enough to hear every second of it, and disciplined enough to say absolutely nothing. Ask veteran instructors what actually breaks students down during selection, and this is the answer more often than the physical strain ever is. Not the ache, not the cold. It's the complete loss of privacy, held for days at a time, while the job still demands total precision the entire way through. It has nothing to do with marksmanship, and everything to do with whether a person can hold their composure through something the human body was never built to postpone. There's no getting up. There never was. And that's worth sitting with for a second, because it says something the recruiting posters never put into words directly. The trigger pull itself takes less than a second. What actually earns that second is 72 hours of dignity, handed over quietly, one small piece at a time. Hathcock's mission ended with 1 round through the general's chest. Then he turned around and crawled the same 1,500 yards back out over 3 more days, while North Vietnamese soldiers combed the area for whoever had just killed their commander. They never found him. 4 days in, 3 days out, 1 shot in between, and the entire operation succeeded or failed on whether a man could stay still enough for long enough that the ground genuinely forgot he was there. 7 days total, most of it spent eating cold rations and sleeping in snatches, spent being nobody, so that for 1 second he could be the only person who mattered in that entire field. Would you have made it past hour 20? Most people who think they would have never actually tried lying still for 3 hours, let alone 72, and the ones who have tried usually stop talking about how tough they are pretty quickly. It's a different kind of hard than most people expect. The kind that has nothing to do with pain tolerance and everything to do with patience most of us have never had to test. It's worth saying plainly, because it's easy to lose in the middle of all this, none of this discomfort is the point. The point is a single, precise shot, taken from a position nobody could find at a moment nobody saw coming. Every hour of cold, every hour of hunger, every hour spent managing a body that wants to move and isn't allowed to, exists only to buy one clean opportunity that lasts less time than it takes to read this sentence out loud. 72 hours of discomfort in exchange for 1 second of certainty. That's the actual trade, and it's a trade very few people would sign up for if you explained it to them honestly before they volunteered. So the real question was never whether someone can physically survive 72 hours motionless in a hide. Training, gear, and raw discipline answer that part every time. The real question is what you'd be willing to give up, quietly and completely, for one shot that lasts less than a second. Every sniper who's ever actually done this already knows the answer. The rest of us just found out what it costs.